And we're here, the penultimate episode for 1997. One more after that and we'll move into 1998. So, without further ado, let's see what we have ready for today. Beasts and Bumpkins, even though it was released by EA, is a rather obscure title, as it was only ever dropped in Europe. Officially, that is. Even more so, with really limited advertising. And so that you would more or less understand what it's all about, it's like a mixture of Settlers and Warcraft. And for the most part, it's very fun and charming in its design and looks title. The idea here is simple: expand your village, make it the best that it could ever be, while keeping your population happy and safe, in the same time fulfilling various objectives. So, you need to provide housing, food, water and all the other necessities that the citizens may require. Fun. Oh, and the population grows naturally, you can't kickstart it, you can't quote-unquote build new villagers, you have to hope that the prospect couple would find themselves interesting enough to seal the deal, so to speak, and that the child that will come from such connection would survive to become an adult. Same goes for any other proficiencies. If you want a villager to be trained in a particular craft, you have to send it to appropriate building and provide him anything he'd need for that. And as much as the first few missions in the game are crafted to get you going and used to the formula, in time, with each next challenge, you'll be getting new and more demanding tasks, like retrieving an artifact, destroying an evil shrine or opposing village. And other than the objectives, each new mission teaches you some new in-game mechanic or adds a new feature, like scrolls and such, so that you never get that feeling of stallness and repetitive gameplay that many games in the RTS genre do. In other words, progress is not too fast, allowing you to learn everything at a steady but not rushed pace, and in the same time always keeping you involved with something new and interesting. Beasts and Bumpkins could never rival giants of the genre that came out in the same year. It emanates that shareware feel, while not being shareware at all. It's full of fun ideas, just lacks that last layer of polish. Drome is a third or first-person futuristic sci-fi vehicular shooter. Oh my god, what a combo! It takes place in a currently not so far off future of 2057, so, beware. The prisons are overcrowded, as they are even today, and since more and more hardened criminals are sent to them, a situation is beginning to get out of control. The court, so the Committee of Recreation Termination, supervising all the jails, decided to find a solution. And they did, quickly and inhumanly, as you'd expect from dystopian nightmare, in the form of new, extremely fatal kind of a game that pits all the worst of the worst against each other in series of gladiatorial-style vehicular battles to see who could survive 3 rounds in each of the 8 super prisons, all to win back their freedom. So, before you jump in, you have to pick up a so-called runner, which is your vehicle, and there are 8 of these in the game, differing in their stats considerably. Some are resistant but slower, others faster but very glass cannony, and each and every one has its strong and weak points. Generally speaking, Drome is very similar to an earlier game, Quarantine, that we've covered in one of the former videos, just not as good. So, it's your arena-style shooter but in vehicles, with various different weapons and other items scattered around the levels and numerous enemies to dispose of. While some of the weapons are obviously better than the others, so Scorch Missile or Shockwave for instance, you can only hold 3 at a time, so it may require a bit of strategizing when picking armament to be as universal and ready for anything that your opponents will throw at you as possible. There's no way going around it, however you look at Drome, it's as simple as they come. Imagine Quake-free arena and make it simpler in vehicles on less interesting arenas and you're gonna end up with Drome. Despite all that, I'm not saying that Drome is a bad game, cause it's not. It features pretty decent playing enemies and fun loop if you like arena shooters, that is. And it will definitely provide plenty enough entertainment for at least couple of evenings. Does it have staying power beyond that? Not really, but most arena shooters that aren't exceptional don't. The Great Battles of Alexander is a first in soon after to be Great Battles series of games and a turn-based computer wargame adapted from a physical tabletop game of the same title. It depicts 10 of Alexander the Great's key conflicts as the leader of Macedonian armies, and simulates his tactics and strategies in opposition to the rivalry military doctrines of the time. So you'll face Greece, India, Persia and others, conquering them for the betterment of Macedonian Empire. Or not, cause you could lose too. Though, honestly, being historically accurate, Alexander has an upper hand in most conflicts, so losing is not really that easy. The game forfeits the supply, support, conscription and nation management parts of the warfare entirely and focuses on tactics alone, which has its up and downsides. Naturally, there have been many improvements as compared to the original tabletop outing, like nice high-resolution graphics, individual units animation and automation of very deep and thorough underlying classic wargames rule set, so that the gamers don't have to calculate all of them themselves. So stuff like variance in power of weapons that the different units wield, applied tactics, morale, incentive, momentum and the likes, reflecting real-life conflicts, are all simulated underneath, so to speak, letting you give all of your attention to the battlefield and not waste time running calculations on series of numbers each turn. I'm exaggerating, but only a little. At the time of its release, The Great Battles of Alexander was praised for its sound and graphical design, and most of all for its stellar AI and realistic depiction of conflicts. It can be played in single battles or in a full 10 conflict strong campaign, and also in hot seat and online multiplayer. Rally Challenge is an interesting genre rally racer. Unlike most big rally titles of the time, it had very limited budget and a small team behind it, and it shows. It doesn't mean, however, that it's a bad game, cause it's really not, but so you don't get your hopes up, being a fan of Fast and Furious racing and all, it's not great either. It's a title I would have happily back then paid like a third of a price for, and be content with my choice. As a full-priced game, however, I'd have a lot to say about it, and not all of it would be positive. There's only 3 cars to choose from in Rally Challenge: Proton Wyra, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing here, Toyota Celica GT4 and Subaru Impreza WRX. That's not nothing, but far from a wide choice many other games had even few years earlier. The tracks, or more accurately stages, can be snowy, muddy, asphalt or dirt covered, making for a fun and action-packed varied gameplay. And you can play Rally Challenge in 3 different modes. Single stage, which kinda explains itself, Ghost Race, in which you race against your previous run, and Championship Season, which also requires no explanation and is naturally the most feature-complete and fun part of the game. The championship takes place on all 9 stages in 9 countries, Sweden, Indonesia, Australia, Greece and France among others, against 9 other players, human or CPU, and it's played on a turn-by-turn basis, without any opposing races when you're driving. There's few different views that you can race in, and for the most part Rally Challenge is pretty decent. Until you complete it, that is. Cause unlike those bigger rally games, when you're done with it, you have that uncanny feeling of having seen it all and not needing to play it ever again. And sadly, that's exactly the case. When you're done, and you really don't feel like replaying it. And not only for a while, but at all. So yeah, it's a game, it's okay for a little while, but ultimately nothing special. Raiden II originated in the arcades. It's a vertically scrolling shoot-em-up and a follow-up to earlier cult classic, Raiden. And believe it or not, it has a plot. It continues it where the first game left it off. It's 3 years since you repelled the invasion of alien crystals, and the remnants of the machines controlled by them have started regrouping to form a new attack army and resume taking over the Earth. To face this new alien threat, the new weapon was developed to repel the scum of the face of fortunately still our planet. The spaghetti-bending plasma ray. Not an official name, I'm afraid, but I feel that it fits. It locks onto the enemies, and while it only deals small amounts of damage, it does it constantly and without the need for aiming, making it ultimately a very versatile weapon. If used properly, that is, as it's a bit of a trap for newer players. It's seemingly easy to use and locks on, and they quickly learn to rely on it, but utilizing it properly is not as straightforward as the other 2 weapons. It's easy to find yourself in a situation where your attack is less powerful than you'd hope. So, equipped with it, along with 2 earlier weapons of spread shot and concentrated beam, various missiles and 2 kinds of bombs, you're finally ready to get rid of the attackers once and for all. And good, cause whenever you come back home from a mission and want to just chill for a little while, regroup and rest up, you know, as you do, there always seems to be some kind of a crisis pulling you straight back into fight. So when this is done, you should take your well-deserved vacation. Playing Raiden 2 will not be a walk in the park, however, as it keeps dropping enemies you at a rapid pace. There's way more of them than in the predecessor, and bosses are both bigger and more epic than you remember. So juggling all 3 weapons, powering them up and making sure to pick the best for each particular boss is a must. PC version of Raiden 2 is basically one-to-one port from the arcades. Sounds and graphic-wise, by 1997, PCs could do most if not all that the arcades could. Raiden 2 beeps, boops and shines fantastically. And I don't mean it only in 1997 fantastic. It was released in a time when 2D was at the peak of what it could be, and henceforth it doesn't look bad or dated even today. Plus, it has that pixel graphics charm that I am so keen on. So I always look at it favorably. If there's one game in this entire video that has not aged at all, it's Raiden 2. Conquest Earth First Encounter is a pretty innovating for the time RTS. I suck at this, so have very limited experience with the genre and not gonna pull a veil over your eyes here, it's one I've never played myself. So keep that in mind. First Encounter is a typical humans versus aliens fair, and this time it's inhabitants of Jupiter, Jovians, that we're after. Or since it's also an option, we're against the pink and fleshy humans. Interestingly enough, if you know at least a little bit, like very superficial basic about gas giants that Jupiter undoubtedly is, then you know that they don't have a solid surface. But whatever, game logic. Both races have increased difficulty at opposing side planets and have to utilize special units that are used to sustain their race's view reach and prevent it from being obstructed by gases. It's an interesting, though I feel a bit busy work concept. But the differences don't end there. While the humans constantly have to invest in new technologies to gain access to new buildings and units to repel the alien scam, better themselves to answer the call, the need for survival, the aliens, or Jovians I should say really, start with most of their buildings available from the get-go. In the same time, they only have one basic kind of a unit. And while it's rather well armored, it's not very strong or versatile. To gain access to better ones, they need to invest in research to teach themselves how to transform these basic creatures into other kinds of equipment. And yes, you did not hear Drome. I've not misspoken. These basic units of theirs, upon scientific discoveries, learn how to morph into other units. Such is the nature of gas-based creatures, it seems. All I said so far is fun and all, but it's an RTS and what you really wanna hear about is combat, and not everything around it, right? Don't answer, I won't hear it anyway. Unless you comment, then I will, so maybe do. Yeah, do answer below. Anyway, the combat is fast-paced, probably one of the fastest of its time, and designed to handle few simultaneous battles at the same time. So, you not only can tell your units to move along the predefined 6-point path, so a patrol route of sorts, but also issue 3 different kinds of attack and 3 of defense orders, depending on the situation on the battlefield. You can also assign units to reserves that would help your patrols if they are attacked, but otherwise will remain unengaged in combat. Additionally, many of the units have finite ammo and fuel, which needs to be delivered to them so that they could work as intended. If that seems like a lot already, I'm not done talking. You can build special units that when sent to remote locations on the map, point of interest or potential conflict spots, they stream video feed of the location to you remotely. You can have up to 3 of those feeds in picture-in-picture mode next to your main view at once to keep a constant eye on a much larger chunk of the gameplay area. This concept alone is so unique that I wonder why wasn't it more widely used in the genre. But I'm not an RTS player and can't tell you how realistically useful it was, it just seemed like it to me. In the end, if you like RTSs, chances are that this one would be something you'd enjoy. I love turn-based strategies and squad tactics games, and even more so, role-playing games with turn-based combat. I know, I'm broken like that. Anyway, Final Liberation Warhammer Epic 40,000 being the representative of the second is definitely something down my alley. And yet, I've never played it. I never knew of it either, so this may be the real reason for it. It is based on the tabletop game Warhammer 40,000 and its universe and tries to recreate the game in digital format. So, all the rules and tactics you'd use in analog version of it are implemented and possible in Final Liberation 2. You are dropped in the middle of a brutal and seemingly never-ending conflict between the bloodthirsty orcs and human space marines. Using a variety of troops, vehicles big and small and giant robots, you have to defeat the enemy forces. The game is divided into 2 modes, campaign and skirmish. And while in campaign you're limited to playing the human side and its linked series of really well thought out and put together missions, in skirmish against the CPU or a friend, both sides are playable, so you get to learn how it would be to stand on the side of orcs. The campaign features a non-linear storyline, where you're fighting to liberate the planet Volistad, and your results in previous missions, and henceforth campaign terrain that you control, directly corresponds to the points you are given to replace or repair units between the missions. The combat itself is naturally turn-based, and each unit can move and attack in its turn. In campaign, you move all units and then turn switch. In skirmish, players take alternating turns, moving only one unit at a time. It's more fair this way I feel, as even if someone gets the first shot, it's just one and not the whole set of shots. Presentation-wise, while Final Liberation does not offer anything we've not seen in other games, the graphics are clean and well put together, easing your way into gameplay, which is not something that can be said about most tabletop games. So if you're a fan of analog version or turn-based strategy/tactics games at all, you should definitely give it a try. Because you never know, it may become your next favorite classic. Test Drive 4 is an odd one, because among the sea of other arcade racers of the time, it was actually quite highly scored by the Moby Games users, sold incredibly well, getting close to 1 million copies, and yet I find it severely lacking in most departments. But let's go through them in order. As per usual with me, a completely random and not necessarily logical order. So, Test Drive 4 released onto the market that was saturated by arcade racing games. Many of them good, some exceptional, and a lot of average. Point is that it, not having something grabbing your attention instantly and then holding it for a while, was doomed to fail in my books. And it did, cause for me it has close to nothing to offer really. Well, maybe cars, as it has 5 modern for the time supercars like Jaguar XJ220, TVR Cerbera, and 5 classic vintage muscle cars, with Chevrolet models being the majority of these. All of them feel and behave differently while driving, and all are surprisingly fun to drive around if you don't care for realism. Then there's 12 included tracks, which are rather uninspired and not very engaging. There's no damage model in the game whatsoever. Not that it's necessary, but it's always a nice addition. And on top of it all, there are invisible walls everywhere, on the sides of the tracks that is, meaning that you're not really racing, but bobsleighing, which is actually a viable racing technique in this game. I mean, I'm not implying that you would aim to get off the track in a racing game trying to be the fastest, to be the first, but for the sake of realism, it would be nice if you could. Worst of all, any situation that may happen on the track, be it sliding, spinning or losing control of the vehicle, can be resolved by stomping hard on the brake, which is just all sorts of unrealistic and definitely not a subject for today, but some kind of an advanced kinetic physics video. And finally, the graphics, especially the backdrops and roadside objects, all of which are flat and looking as if they came ported directly from PlayStation, which may actually very well be the case of the lowest common denominator here, as Test Drive 4 released on PC and PlayStation simultaneously. You naturally get to race in single races, time trials and the main mode of Championship, which is not that bad, but also nothing that would stick out to grab your interest when compared to other games on the market. And I just realized that I've misspoke, cause there's one thing that I actually enjoyed in Test Drive 4, and I think it was the first game to actually make it right, and it's drag races, with manual switching and surprisingly well crafted as opposed to the rest of the game driving physics. But since it's a quarter-mile race only and having another player there with you is pretty much a requirement for fun, so that you have someone to compete against, it's still not enough to save Test Drive 4 in my eyes. If you played it back then and loved it, it's fine, not trying to change your mind here, but personally I'd rather play Screamer 2 or Need for Speed. Pandemonium 2 is a sequel to, surprise surprise, Pandemonium with an exclamation mark no less, and more of an evolution than the revolution really. Once again, you're in control of the sorceress Nikki and a court jester Fargus, who naturally is accompanied by his puppet Sid the Stick, so sidekick. This time, however, you're not responsible for all the trouble and commotion. Well, last time it was not you either, but Nikki. But you get what I'm saying. It is the year of cheese. In the game, that is. Cause in my household, it's always the year of cheese. In fact, cheese all along, each and every day, 365 days a year cheese. It goes like that. Bacon, then cheese, and then anything else. If you wonder what I enjoy and in what order in particular. I'm a simple kind of a foodie. I like it tasty and not sophisticated. I know, no such word, but couldn't help myself here. Anyway, it's the year of the cheese, blah 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 blah, and the advent of the comet of infinite possibilities containing source of unlimited power is foretold by the great prophet Nos was in it. A cousin, I think, to another of the greats, Nos wasn't in it. So, Nikki and Fargus need to reach the comet first, as the evil goon queen Zorsha is interested in it too, and she's planning on using it for her own devices. So, you're saving the world once again. Only not really, and I lied. Because Zorsha wants to use the power of the comet to bring freedom and happiness to the world, and you're there to stop her. Well, not really stop her, you're there so that Nikki could reach the comet first and become the omnipowerful Sorceress Supreme. And since Fargus lost his mind completely sometime between the two games, he's just hanging around for shits and giggles. So, you're the evil one this time. Whoa! Other than that twist, mechanically not much has changed. Pandemonium 2 remains a 2D platformer sporting 3D graphics, and it's still incredibly lush and colorful, looking like a Pixar movie. Each of our anti-heroes have their own unique skills that you'll utilize for both platforming and environmental puzzling, and since they're so dramatically different from one another, they almost require you to complete the game twice. If you manage to, as same as the last time, it's rather difficult. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit here, it is demanding, but nowhere near the same level the original was. And good, cause the first one was a bit too much for me to truly appreciate. I've left the best for last. Back in the second part of the 90s, fighting games fans were divided into 4 groups. Those who still played 2D fighters and didn't care for the quote-unquote 3D revolution, those who fanatically loved Tekken and saw no other games than their favorite, those who preferred Virtua Fighter to Tekken, and finally those who thought that everything I said to this point was stupid and subscribing yourself to a single particular game or a genre offshoot was limiting and childish. And while I'm definitely in that last 4th camp now, back then I jumped between 2D and Virtua Fighter. I didn't care much for Tekken, and to be honest I kinda still don't. But don't tell anybody, I don't wanna cause a riot here. Out of 2 3D games I always gravitated towards Virtua Fighter simply because it had a PC port. Also, I really enjoyed its slower, more technical approach to combat rather than Tekken's on-screen chaos. I mean, I know and realize that someone versed in the Tekken will not call it chaotic, but to me, an outside observer of the game, it felt uncontrollable. Second, Virtua Fighter was a natural evolution of the first game's roots, and it built on the original rather than remaking it from ground up. It takes place a year after the first one, and the World Fighting Tournament is once again opening its gates to the worthy contestants. Well-known masters from the previous outing, so Akira, Wolf, Pai, Jeffrey, Cage, Jackie, Sarah and Lau, enter once more, this time joined by the two new fighters, Master of the Drunken Kung Fu Shan Di and Lion Rafali, for whom the win in the tournament means reclaiming his freedom. A stellar cast if you ask me, and a wide choice for those who appreciate good fighting games. Why? Because other than the tad too high jumps that the characters can make, all the moves, attacks, jabs and grabs in the game appear to be rather realistic and possible to pull off with a bit of practice outside of the boundaries of the virtual world too. Most likely because they were based on real martial arts, motion captured using real-life fighting style masters as models and not created artificially for the sake of the game and to be as flashy and explosive as possible. So, being heavily rooted in realism, Virtua Fighter stood out from most other fighters of the time, 3D or otherwise. In fact, that realism alone was probably a huge part of its success. A super smooth gameplay and perfectly crafted kick and punch combos look like fights arranged for the best action movies of the time and not like sci-fi inspired plasma and fireballs shooting out of fingertips bonanza. What most devs probably considered would end up being boring, so technical and not flashy fights, Sega crafted, polished and perfected beyond belief, creating this shiny gem of a game. Most former fighters got few new moves each, and all of them have a stomp now, which while not a finisher per se, is definitely a strong attack on a downed opponent. Not kick to the head maybe, but not far off. If you played first Virtua Fighter on PC, second, from a purely technical point of view, is an iterative upgrade only. All characters are as nicely animated as before, but they're all entirely texture mapped now and feature a bit higher polygon count, higher even than Sega's own Saturn. Same can be said about backgrounds, which are fully 3D and more detailed than before, but serving their purpose well, meaning being entirely in a background and not noticeable during gameplay at all. All that's fine and cool and all, but what really guaranteed Virtua Fighter's success were the controls and how they felt, for the lack of a better word. Every character in roster plays different and requires you to get used to a different rhythm of playing, so to speak. Faster combatants are like a melody in a song that flows with each punch and kick, chaining them into less powerful perhaps, but steady coming onslaught of damage. Slower and stronger fighters are a bass line, less frequent but always hitting with an oomph, powerfully and noticeably like those big percussion drums. And there are those that are neither, and they're like the background vocals mixing lively hits and jabs with slower knockout delivering rhythms. Virtua Fighter is not only a thinking man's fighter, but also a borderline music game, with how it plays that is. Naturally, in VF2 you can expect to find all the usual culprits when it comes to game modes, so I'm not gonna cover them as they're no different than in previous entry, but there is one addition in home version that's not present in the arcade original and elevates it above the competition, and it's the so-called expert mode, which actually records how you play in both single and versus modes and then uses that data to counter your playstyle, to teach you how not to get trapped in repeatable patterns, but to react to your opponent in a natural and unpredictable ways. Not many games have done it then, and not many do it now. PC's Virtua Fighter 2 port is easily one of the best games of the entire 1997, and I say that being a predominantly strategy and role-playing gamer that mostly sucks at versus fighting games. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I still have probably short of 100 more games for 1997, but I feel that the next 10th episode will be a good culmination for the year, allowing me to respectfully cover most interesting and important games for the year without dipping too much into the terrible. So, the next one will be the last before we jump into 1998. What do you think of today's selection though? Fire, right? Yeah, I think so too. Don't pull me out of this rose-tinted dream by disagreeing. Or do. Conversations here are definitely encouraged. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Smash them if you have to, it helps more than you could ever know. Also, I would like to thank you and all my amazing Patreon and YouTube members for helping this channel keep going. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank all the wonderful folks who record and upload playthroughs, let's plays and other retro-centric videos here on YouTube, because they help to preserve the games that would have otherwise been long forgotten. So thank you.